Hi, I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs, and welcome to Report Cards, a series where I grade every mythic rare from the set based on how unique they are, what they can do beyond being a regular rare, and what creative deck building opportunities they provide. In this video, I'll be taking the measure of the monstrosities of the house, be they creature or amusement park ride? I hope I'll earn a like and subscribe from you by the end of the video, and I'm curious to hear about your opinions on these cards and my analysis of them. Now, without further ado, on to the review. This card brings a whole new meaning to give your opponents the evil eye.
Abhorrent Oculus. For 1 blue and 2 generic, you get a 5/5 eye creature with flying. As an additional cost to cast this spell, exile 6 cards from your graveyard, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, manifest Dread. This means look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other into your graveyard. Turn it face up at any time for its mana cost if it's a creature card. 3 mana for a 5/5 flyer is quite a deal. Of course, exiling 6 cards from your yard is a real cost, but with fetch lands and even a modest amount of self-mill or discard effects, shouldn't be a major impediment. We have seen a very similar design historically, so it's interesting to note the differences between them after 13 years. Indeed, Abhorrent Oculus could help fuel your Scab Reanimator by putting 3 cards into your graveyard per turn cycle. I'm not a fan of face-down cards, since they require a 3 mana down payment for an abilityless 2/2. But manifesting Dread for free means you can bypass that cost entirely, which is a big savings. I'm quite interested to see how the Manifest Dread mechanic plays out, and if the utility of putting cards into your graveyard makes it noticeably better. Outside of these mechanics, this creature will build your board presence quickly. There are quite a few fan favorites in this mold, and I wonder if Abhorrent Oculus will be seen in the same light. Consider that, once it comes back around to your turn, you'll have 3 manifested creatures, all of which are ready to attack. That's 11 damage as early as turn 4. Overall, I think this is a very fascinating fusion of ideas. The amount of creatures this can generate is a bit surprising for a blue card, but pushing the limits of a new mechanic is something I love to see, and will really help players get an understanding of its full potential. I adore Abhorrent Oculus, and I'm giving it an A.
If a beast shrieks in the Hauntwoods and no one's around to hear it, does it still make a sound?
Hauntwoods Shrieker. For 2 green and 1 generic, you get a 3/3 Beast Mutant. Whenever Hauntwoods Shrieker attacks, manifest Dread. For 1 green and 1 generic, reveal target face down permanent. If it's a creature card, you may turn it face up. Stat-wise, this card is very tame as far as green mythic creatures go, and I think that's a good thing. Again, I'm not really a fan of face down card gameplay because, in general, you wind up paying a fair bit more mana in the long run in order to essentially play a little shell game that seems more interesting as a concept than it is in execution. Hauntwoods Shrieker is an excellent exception to this though, for a few reasons. Firstly, it bypasses a lot of the mana expenses that come with face down cards by A, potentially putting them into play face down for free when you attack, and B, letting you turn them face up at most likely a minimum of a 1 or 2 mana discount. If you can get savings from both of these effects, your face down spells will effectively cost 4 mana less, and that is an incredible value. The second reason this card defies my pessimism for face down gameplay is because it doesn't actually require you to care about face down creatures at all. Hauntwoods Shrieker will work just fine if you fill your deck with giant, expensive creatures, manifest them into play for free, and then flip them face up for a fraction of their actual casting cost. A little top deck manipulation will go a long way if that's your plan, maximizing your chances of finding your dreaded creatures. Just be advised, creatures with enters triggers won't pair well with this approach, since they'll miss their opportunity to trigger if they enter the battlefield face down. Lastly, there's an interesting application here, where you can look at face down permanents your opponents control. That's a nifty trick, though I would be a bit surprised if you ever managed to make effective use of it, but in the interest of being thorough, I thought I'd point it out. Ultimately, this is a fine design. It plays great with face down cards, really giving that strategy a desperately needed boost, and it's totally reasonable if you're just looking to cheat the mana system. It doesn't excite me personally, but I can see the appeal. And any design that plays well in multiple ways is doing something right, even if I'm not shouting with excitement about it. Grade B.
This next card is a real hoot. You scream, I scream, we all scream for Nemesis.
Screaming Nemesis. For 1 red and 2 generic, you get a 3/3 Spirit with haste. When Screaming Nemesis is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target. If a player is dealt damage this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. For the rest of the game is a serious line of text, only appearing on 11 other cards to date. But it's important to clarify that it only works if Screaming Nemesis is dealt damage. So, as the defending player, this creature gets a free pass to attack you for 3 each turn, which can certainly add up over time, but pretty much sucks the joy out of this card's design. Alternatively, if Screaming Nemesis hangs back to block, it can be a major deterrent for your opponents attacking you. But again, this text, on a creature with haste no less, it isn't meant to be cooped up on defense, which means you'll need to take matters into your own hands. You could force creatures to block if able, pick some fights with other creatures, or just stay within Red's wheelhouse and deal damage to Screaming Nemesis yourself. I do love this design, which uses the effect of creatures dishing damage they take back out, and merges it with an extreme and mythic quality punishment. That is, as long as you value gaining life, which I certainly do, and would recommend that you include a few powerful or repeatable sources of in your own decks. But I don't know that the majority of players feel the same way, and I can easily imagine a newer or more casual player getting this card, being excited to use it and shut off life gain, only to find this doesn't accomplish that goal as cleanly as it would appear. It kind of boils down to a 3/3 unblockable creature on offense, or a 3/3 death touch on defense. And yes, I'm a huge proponent of cards that give you the freedom to build around them, but Screaming Nemesis is kind of a trap in that if you don't go out of your way to build around it, you're going to feel bad about how it plays out in game. Ultimately, I think this will be a devastatingly effective card in the right decks. I just wish they could have found a better way to thread the needle of what players expect this card to do with how it will actually perform. Maybe I'm off the mark here, but I have my reservations, and they put Screaming Nemesis at a B.
Has anyone ever told you that your love is like a roller crusher that they want to ride?
The Rollercrusher Ride. For 1 red, 2 generic, and X generic, you get a legendary enchantment that says Delirium. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player, while there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, it deals double that damage instead. When the Rollercrusher Ride enters, it deals X damage to each of up to X target creatures. With cards like this that have a best case and a base case scenario, I prefer to look at the base case first, so let's skip the Delirium clause for now. At 5 mana, X will be 2, meaning you'll deal 2 damage to 2 targets. Not great. For 6 mana and an X of 3, you get 3 damage to 3 targets. Reasonable. But it's really only once you hit 7+ mana and an X value of 4 and beyond that the base scenario will really start killing high value targets. For a one-sided effect, that's completely reasonable, and being one-sided is a massive advantage. Interestingly, the best case scenario of having Delirium online helps the lower values of this card more than the higher ends, since 5 mana to deal 4 damage to 2 creatures and 6 mana to deal 6 damage to 3 creatures is more significant than dealing 10 damage to a creature a majority of the time. But more damage is certainly welcome, and overkill is a growing design space. So the Rollercrusher Ride could be a great asset in that sense. Speaking of which, this card could be totally acceptable if you cast it for X equals 0. Granted, you need to be fully committed to the Delirium plan, but doubling your non-combat damage for only 3 mana is an incredible bargain. There are a growing number of red effects that augment your damage, and this would be a brutal way to cap those effects, since you can stack the Rollercrusher Ride trigger last and double all of the added points of damage at the end. The hard part is finding the right mix of card types and getting them into your graveyard so that you have the right mix to trigger Delirium, but those decisions are the fun part of deck building. A potential one-sided board wipe, or massive damage modifier for cheap. The Rollercrusher Ride has some interesting use cases on all points of the mana curve. Plus, it asks for some consideration to get maximum effectiveness from it. I'm giving it Translation, Grade A.
Next up is a card name that I really can't believe that I'm reading.
Meathook Massacre 2. For 4 black, X generic, and X generic, you get a legendary enchantment that says, when Meathook Massacre 2 enters, each player sacrifices X creatures. Whenever a creature you control dies, you may pay 3 life. If you do, return that card under your control with a finality counter on it. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they may pay 3 life. If they don't, return that card under your control with a finality counter on it. So I believe the flavor behind this is like the title of a horror movie. So this is the sequel to the first Meathook Massacre. Still, it's a little too tongue-in-cheek for my liking. As for the card itself, there's a lot to unpack. If you pay 6 mana to cast this, you get a value of X equals 1, so each player will sacrifice 1 creature. You can then buy your own creature back for 3 life, which is a very fair rate, especially if it has an Enters trigger that you can make good use of. And unless your opponents are sacrificing tokens, which get exiled when they die, they're going to have to start making some painful decisions. The fact that this card can scale up to kill every creature in play, albeit for an exorbitantly high cost, is a grisly, great option to have available to you. But best of all, I think casting this card with an X value of 0 is plenty effective. Creatures can and will be dying all the time, and this will trigger no matter what's causing them to hit the yard. So you can get heaps of value amassing a free army, or simply grind your opponent's life totals down as they pay 3, 6, 9 life and more to keep the hordes at bay. When a card is good for both a lot of mana and a little mana, it's a great design. The only drawback I can foresee is your friends getting irritated by you constantly asking if they're going to pay 3 life each time their creatures die. Of course, maybe that's part of the card's appeal to you, in which case, there are cards to complement that strategy, letting you question your opponents every time they take a game action. You sociopath. Regardless, this design has me hooked, so I'm giving Meathook Massacre 2 an A.
And there you have it, my grades for the 5 mythic monstrosities of Duskmourn. Did I roller crush it? Or have I made a screaming nemesis of you? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope I earned a like and subscribe from you, and I'd love it if you'd share this video. If not, I appreciate you hearing me out. You can follow me on X at UnsolicitedMTG for channel updates and other nonsense, and I hope you'll check back next week where I go over the legendary creatures of the set. Once again, I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs, and who asked me anyways?